This is a Note to Future Me, April 17th, 2018. Entitled, If You're Procrastinating on Starting That Podcast, Do the First Piece of It. Now, we have all had tasks that we put off, but actually accomplishing them is rarely as bad as we expect. And I think this falls perfectly in line in starting a podcast. You wouldn't believe the number of, I'm going to call them hobbyist podcasters, that continue to kick the can down the road, because they do find excuses to not start, whether it's not the right mic, I can't find the right room in my home to do this, the topics, I just don't think it's where I want to start. Well, sometimes beating procrastination is about just getting over the initial hurdle. Instead of forcing yourself to tackle the entire task, let's call this task starting your podcast at once, focus on the first piece of it. Now, start by thinking about starting the podcast and your resistance to it. And you may not call it resistance, but there is resistance to it because you're coming up with excuses to not start. Okay? And then find a time period that you'll be willing to commit. Okay? Can you focus on starting that podcast for about an hour? Give yourself time to sit down and start thinking about envisioning how you're going to do this podcast. If you can't do it for an hour, how about 30 minutes? Okay, shorten the amount of time to something that doesn't make you resist getting started. All right? But getting started is the key. And I think envisioning you starting the podcast and creating the podcast will help you get over the hurdle as well, too. Figure out the bare minimum you can do so you won't return to your procrastinating ways. Yes, you may take those first initial steps to begin podcasting, but don't let the negativity, the hesitation creep in that kicks it down the road again and again and again, okay? Once you begin the task or beginning your podcast will seem much more manageable. Now, working on something, even in small pieces, means you'll continue to process it, which makes you more likely to resume the work later on. And once the ball gets rolling to start your podcast, you'll see that the process, as I mentioned earlier, really wasn't as big as you thought it wasn't a big a hurdle as you thought. And you'll begin, and all of a sudden it becomes second habit that you can't wait to open the mic, as it were. Thanks for taking notes with me. If you'd be interested in my free weekly email newsletter called Open the Mic Newsletter, go to circle270media.com. I post and publish news you may have missed about the podcasting space, as well as tips like this, or social media updates and such. Anything that I find that I think will help podcasters be better.